Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Hiker Sessions. As always, this is where we speak with long distance hikers, day hikers, and everyone in between. I do want to mention I've been remiss in prior episodes. The artwork that you see behind me, it's done by a local Maine artist who was kind enough to donate it to the show. His name is Hunter Law. If you want to check out his work, you can find him at Hunter Law on Facebook. And the show and myself just want to give him a thank you for that. Today's show is a first for us. We have a guest on who is a triple crowner. And now, for those of you who don't know what a triple crowner is, by long distance hiking definition, it's someone who has completed the almost 2,200-mile Appalachian Trail, the approximately 3,000-mile Continental Divide Trail, and the over 2,600-mile Pacific Crest Trail. Guest today, Michael Goshey, who goes by Maxheap on the trail, completed all three of those hikes, first in a southbound fashion, and is now 1/3 of the way to his next Triple Crown after completing the Appalachian Trail northbound in 2023. Also, last year in 2024, he completed a unique journey that I hope you all stick around to hear about. Welcome to the show, Maxheap.
Thank you very much. It's a bit humbling to hear an introduction like that, but thank you. And yeah, I'm very happy to speak with you.
I was really excited to hear about someone who's done, all three hikes. I remember you recalled being asked during your first hike, and your first hike was in 2015. You did the Appalachian Trail southbound. You were asked if you'd ever consider hiking another long trail or repeating the AT, and you said, and I quote, "That would be ludicrous to think about doing that." What changed for you in the time between finishing the AT and doing these other long trails?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I absolutely. So first of all, when I was hiking the AT, I hadn't really heard of the other trails. Toward the end of my first AT hike, I started hearing about other long trails, but I, for me, it just really felt like, I mean, a lot of people frame a through hike as sort of a once in a lifetime experience, and that's absolutely how I embraced it. And I just thought, given the amount of time off it takes and the coordination of life and all that, I assumed it would be one and done. And I kept spurring myself on in the last month or so of the hike with that idea that you'll never have to do this again. Just hang in there. And so I left the trail with that in mind. And I worked, I'm a software engineer, and the company that I worked for hired me back. In fact, they've hired me after all my hikes. They've hired me 5 times now in total. So I went back and I was working for a couple of years, and I noticed I kept looking at other people's videos and blogs and so forth, and I noticed I started feeling that call of the trail again. And so it just sort of happened gradually, but within a couple of years, I realized it wasn't going to go away, and I was going to I wanted to try another. And so, yeah, but yes, that's how I answered it, and that's how I felt at the beginning, absolutely.
I totally get that. I think you started your next long hike in 2019.
That's right.
So in those years between, obviously you started thinking about it after a couple of years. Did you do other hikes or day hikes, or what did that hiking look in between that 4-year span?
Uh, no, I'm probably not a very good example. So I love the experience of um, being on a long project hike, so one that takes many months to complete and that just looks terribly daunting from the beginning. And so I'm less attracted by I like to hike. We live right by a hiking trail. I live in Washington State, and I like to get out on trail and hike on a daily basis, but um I have never really gotten the same uh, spark from shorter hikes. And so I don't, it's possible I did some hikes between there. I know I was out on trails for a day or two here and there, but I don't think I did any overnight hiking in between. But
You were 50 years old in 2015 when you started the AT southbound. It doesn't sound like you did many hikes in between, but before that, what kind of experience did you have and what led you to hit the AT in the first place?
Yeah. The only backpacking or overnight hiking experience I had when I was a teenager, a friend from school and his dad took me. We did the Boundary Waters in Minnesota, if you know about like Voyageur National Park up there. We did about a week in the Boundary Waters, and we also did a week out in Glacier National Park. And it was just sort of like 5 to 7 miles a day, pretty relaxed hiking. And I didn't know much at the time, and of course was carrying very heavy gear, but I did really enjoy it. But yeah, after that, not much. Life intervened, married, 5 children, and my wife and I have the basis of most of our family vacations over the years was taking the kids to either state parks or national parks, and we would do like, tent camping there, and we'd do day hikes and stuff. But backcountry hiking was only the two experiences in high school. Mhm.
You mentioned the spark that you get out of those, multi-long month hikes and stuff. What is that spark? Can you define it?
Yeah, and actually, I just realized I didn't answer the second half of that other question about what got me into hiking in the first place. So I work. It's a bit of a long story. I spent a long time in Japan earlier in my life, and I was a Japanese English translator and a simultaneous interpreter. Got really interested in software when I was doing Japanese translation, and then ended up going back to school for some other degrees in software and computer science, and then shifted my career in that direction. And I worked for a long time. I started as a software engineer and then got promoted into increasingly jobs of increasing responsibility and so forth. And what happened is around age 50, I was in a really tense job where our company had tens of thousands of pieces of, between network gear and computers and uh, all the devices that people use in the company and so forth. And I was essentially responsible for the engineering team that took care of all that. And so when you have a profile of that many devices, there's always stuff going wrong. I mean, always 24/7, there's always something breaking down. And eventually, the on call aspect of that role, where I was constantly having to get on the phone and hold hands with some business executive who was worried about their system and so forth, I needed a break. And so when I turned 50, I talked to my wife and said, look, I think I'm going to need a break. How would you feel if I were just to take a year off? And so we agreed that's what I would do. And at first, I this is I had read Bill Bryson's Walk in the Woods, so I knew that there was this thing called the Appalachian Trail. But I was really content. I had taken off in one of our family vehicles and was doing national park visits and day hikes in the parks. And I was in Rainier, and this idea just reminded me, it sort of popped in my head because I was just enjoying hiking so much. And I remembered this book about the Appalachian Trail, and I went back and researched it that evening in my room and realized, I think it was in May when I looked it up. And I think 3 weeks later, I was on the AT going southbound. And so it was a very much of a spur of the moment, but it was based on already having negotiated or discussed with my wife about taking a year off. So I knew I had the time. And yeah, and then the spark, let's see. Hmm. The spark I get from through hiking is a couple of things. One is the physical challenge, the endurance aspect of it. I really like that. And I've been working in sedentary work for decades. And so uh, it makes me feel like I felt when I was younger. I don't mean that I'm trying to relive my youth or something like that, but rather I feel really invigorated and energized by the physical activity. It's extremely exhausting at first, but then, and I'm sure you can relate to this, after you've been on the trail for a while, you start thinking about, okay, wow, right now I can do things with my body that I can't normally do. And of course, when you go off trail and a few months later and you can't do them again. But during that time while you're on trail, it's extremely rewarding and satisfying, the physical part of it. And then there's the, call it mental or psychological or emotional part of it. Again, I find that very satisfying. This idea of starting out with this really long project in mind, that something that's going to take you 5 or 6 months of just doing, chipping away at it every single day. And on any given day, your progress isn't enough to make you convinced just by the strength of that one day that you're going to do it. But over time, you stick with it, and after a month or a week or 2 months or 2 weeks, or whatever, you look back and you say, "Oh yeah, there's a bunch of progress there." I just like how life becomes really simple on the trail. I'm sure you've heard that one a lot. All of your all the things you normally worry about. I'm a worrywart, so I still worry about stuff on trail, but the number of things, the list of things that I have to think about and worry about just gets reduced really to just how many miles will I walk today. I don't even have to decide the direction because, a through hike is in a direction. Um, and yeah, I like the simplicity of proving to myself. I mean, collectively, I've probably lived on trail out of a tent and a pack for like 3 years of my life, something like that, maybe more. And so I have absolutely proved to myself that you can enjoy and live a very high level of high quality in your life with just a very few items in a pack. So it's a spark that's sort of, it's both a physical and a mental thing, and it makes me feel better. It's I've told a couple of people, it's the way I think about it, it's the therapy that I never knew I needed. But once I started, I realized, yeah, this has to be in my life because it's made me much healthier. I'm certain at 62 right now that both physically and mentally, I'm in a way better place than I was when I was 50. Yeah.
That's great to hear. You mentioned your youth. On one of your through hikes, you had said that one of the things that surprised you at your age, whatever age that was, but obviously after 50, that you were surprised that you could do something and be proud. You thought you were done being, you know how little kids are proud when they do something and they, tell mommy or daddy. You thought that was over for you, but that surprised you that you started having those feelings again. Could you
That
talk about that?
Yeah, it's specifically that happened in the on the Appalachian Trail, and I think the first time it happened was in the 100-mile wilderness. There was a crossing. I think it was, and you'd know this better than I do. I think a couple of the crossings in the 100-mile at that time anyway had ropes strung from bank to bank, tree trunks, whatever. And I think it might have been one of those crossings, but I just remember walking up to it and looking at it, and it was early in the season. The rivers, the crossings were swollen and difficult, and I was alone, and I looked at it and I thought, oh no, I can't do this. And I really, I was solo, so I was early in my hike, and I thought, well, is this what people do? You just reach a point where you realize you can't get any farther and just turn around and quit. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, okay, I'm going to at least, I can't leave without at least trying. And so I put a foot in the water and another, and the current was pushing me pretty good. And I just did what I was told to do, face into the current and sort of sidestep my way across. Uh, and I got to the other side, and it was exactly what you just described. I had that feeling of the first, when you're a kid, you want to, who are my parents? Is somebody around who saw me do this? And I think I physically reacted like, oh, did anybody see that I did that? And nobody was there. But I had that feeling of, oh, I am proud of myself in this very innocent, childlike way of hey, that was a challenge and I bested it. And then so on the strength of that, the next time I had something daunting on the trail, I just sort of drew from that experience, and it prompted me a little more forward each time. And yeah, so it's a feeling of being proud of yourself, but in a very, not in an adult way, more like in a very innocent, childlike uh way. And yeah, I had assumed, I think it had probably been decades since I had had that feeling at the time. Of course, now I feel it regularly when I'm out on trail.
Our good friend Vegas, he was on the show 2 or 3 weeks ago. He
Great guy.
described it, great guy, and he described it as it's tough to tell other people, even your wife. I think you've been married about the same time I have, 35 years or so, I think.
We are, yeah, it's almost 36 for us. Yes. You
Yeah,
too.
You say it close, yeah.
Oh, cool.
So, I can't even describe it to my wife, who's my best friend and partner. And Vegas describes it as a shared trauma, which sounds really harsh, but when you're in it together,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think you get what that is. Hey, one thing that I'm always interested in, uh, because it's outside of the norm a little bit, is people who decide, especially for their first through hike, to go southbound on the
Oh, yeah.
Appalachian Trail. And I read that you said that at least partially part of the reason you did it that way was because you kind of thought there would be more solitude, no bubble, and everything like that. How did that solitude work out for you?
Yeah, that was part of the math for me, was knowing that what had been printed up until that point was that the Sobo experience, and I think it's probably true on all three of the Triple Crown trails. The Sobo direction is by far the minority direction, so you get fewer cohorts. Um, as it turned out, it was what I thought, but it also turned into something that I didn't expect. So there were far fewer people going southbound, but we all ended up bonding quite a bit. And so the largest trail family I've ever been part of was really that first through hike. And we all during while we were still in Maine. So I'm trying to think, like when we went to the cabin in Maine and various places like that, we were all together as a group hiking. And I haven't had that exact experience replicated after that. But yeah, so it was more solitude, but then I think that itself created a bit of a bond with the Sobo through hikers. Uh, yeah, so I like a lot of hikers. I like the solitude. Prefer, not all the time, but I like walking alone. I think any even somebody like me, the idea of, yeah, but when you're going to stop for the day, isn't it nice to have a few people around to compare notes? Oh yeah, wow, that climb was brutal, or hey, that was cool, or did you see that animal, or whatever. And so, if you get that mix of, you get plenty of solitude, but you get a chance to compare notes and share the camaraderie at night, or at lunchtime or whatever, so much the better. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard those experiences tied to, oh, I can't, I forget, I can't give credit, but if they hear me say it, they'll know. They've described those campsites and things at the end of the day, because I was a lot like you. I didn't hike lockstep side beside somebody all day, right? But at the end of the day, you get around those shelters and those tent sites and things. And I've heard them described as ephemeral nodes, where everyone kind of joins up at the end of the day, and then you may leave the next day and never see someone there that you saw there again. It's the way the Appalachian Trail works sometimes. After that first through hike, you came up with some things, and there was a list of things that you'd learned. And
Yeah.
I found two or three, maybe four real interesting ones, and I'll read it, and then I just want you to touch on it a little bit, and we'll move on to the next one. So one of
Okay,
those
sure.
things were that you said, I am more of a social being than I previously understood.
Mm. Yeah. Most people who've been part of corporate life eventually have done one variety or a stripe of these personality tests, right? And I've done I think it's Myers-Briggs, and they have this great definition of what an introvert and an extrovert are. And rather than the normal thing of introverts are just, or extroverts are, outgoing and introverts are shy, the way they describe it is introverts get their energy from either being alone or being in really small groups. And extroverts draw their energy from being in big groups and parties and crowds. And I love those definitions because I feel like those really frame up. I am an introvert. But having said that, so so after I had done Myers Briggs, and it rang so true to me. So I've always sort of known that that's who I am. And so I've always assumed that, generally speaking, and see, I have no problem being alone for long stretches of time. I've driven across the country a bunch of times, and just the idea of sitting and not talking for hours at a time doesn't bother me in the least. So I just assumed that my preference on trail was going to be to always be alone. But then I discovered that, on the contrary, the camaraderie really added something that sort of caught me off guard. And it turned out for me, the people were the biggest surprise on the trail. Like you knew you were going to get incredible exposure to wildlife and to scenery and stuff. But what I didn't really realize is how many really nice, interesting people I would meet along the way, and just that we would become lifelong friends, which we have. Yeah.
Yeah. The next thing is that it is liberating to look like a hippie.
Yeah. So I was very much a button down corporate. So in that job that I described that sort of had burned me out, I was expected to be the face of the engineering organization for our company. And so I had to maintain a certain look, and that's fine. And I went to military school when I was a kid, and so I had always had short hair and clean shaven and all that. And I kind of let it go on the trail, on the AT. Then when I came back and started working again, I one more time I cut my hair and shaved. And then since then, so since the summer of 2015, I just said, you know what? So I met a former boss who was surprised to see how I look now, which is long hair and a beard. And we were talking about it, and she said, "Well, help me understand why the change?" And I said, "Well, for me, it's just like there's an equilibrium now. Like, in other words, the person that I feel like on the inside, I don't know why I'm getting choked up thinking about it, but feels now like the same person that I look like on the outside." And for me, it took away a lot of stress to stop trying to look or be a certain way. And yeah, it's so liberating to look like a hippie just because that's sort of how I feel on the inside. So yeah.
Wow, that's because I myself too. I mean, I was always clean shaven, shaved 5 days a week. First thing I did Monday mornings. That's really deep, though. I'm gonna have to think about that the rest of the day a little bit because I really really like the way you put that. That really
Yeah,
speaks to me.
that's how it feels. Hmm.
Yeah, that taking a gap year later in life should be a thing.
Yeah. I I'm not saying that the through hiking experience itself is something that everybody has to try and enjoy. Like there are different things that turn people on in different ways. But the point I was making about that is that I think it's very easy in a sort of competitive, consumer driven culture and society that we live in to just never really allow yourself to take a break until you retire. And I think that's wrong because most people work until a point in retirement where it's a lot more difficult to maybe check off some of those things you always wanted to do when you were younger or so yeah, I am a very strong advocate for the idea of people somewhere in their mid-career. It takes planning and coordinating. It's not easy to do to take that much time off. You have to save money. You have to usually you need a partner who can help you coordinate and so forth. But if you can, I I am a strong advocate, obviously, for through hiking itself, but beyond that, for taking a year away from the grind of your normal daily work based existence and go out and pursue some, whatever that thing is that you think you'd like to try. And I didn't spend 20 years daydreaming about through hiking. It came up rather suddenly, but it's because I had worked out to take a year off that I was able to dive into it. And then, yeah, I was so glad that I did.
Yeah, and the last one that I thought was really timely that watching the news is unhealthy.
Do you know, I thought I had learned that when I wrote it, but I continued for a long time to be a news junkie after that. But I can say now I have severed. So what I do now is I want to stay informed. So in the morning, typically, I will look at AP or BBC's, a site that's sort of known to be relatively objective. And I'll just glance at headlines and then maybe not even every day, maybe every couple of days I'll see a headline for an article that catches that's quite interesting to me and I'll read further. And then but that's it. I stay, especially the TV news, because I feel like the the priority for a newscast is to be appealing and to get people to watch so that they get advertising dollars. And so it just frames up this approach to the news that's just very sort of hyper sense. I don't know the right word. I do, but I can't think of it right now. But anyway, so yeah, I'm just sort of off that treadmill, and I keep a blog and YouTube videos mostly for my own memories and then for family and friends who want to watch. But other than that, I also moved off of social media after that. And I don't go around advocate like it's just a personal preference. But what I have found is that the lack of those distractions and the temptations that they provide um, and for me they create a negative internal monologue. I'm one of those persons, one of those people who will look at somebody else's Instagram and then criticize my own life, even though I know how stupid that is to do, and yet I still do it. So I've just found getting away from all that, it's kind of like, I suppose it's like if you're somebody who has a weakness for potato chips, the easiest thing is just don't have them in the house. And that's kind of where I'm at, is that I have pulled myself away from that stuff and only found it to be beneficial. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I got to ask, you've mentioned math once, you said, and computer science. It reminds me that if I don't ask you how you got your trail name, my buddy Solar will holler at me because I've done a couple interviews and forgot to ask. Describe to me how you got your trail name, Maxheap.
Oh boy. Okay.
In
I was,
layman's terms, I
well, I
Googled
get,
it, but I need you to lay it out for me simple.
okay. Well, I get a little choked up because there's a little more to it. So a max heap is a data structure. It's a way to organize data efficiently for certain operations. A max heap stores the highest value at the top of a heap, and then it's sort of a tree of values down from there. And a min heap is just the opposite. It stores the lowest value. And so it stores values in a sort of a sorted fashion. It's a tree, and the structure is used. What happened is prior to any through hikes, I was studying for my master's in computer science. We had 5 kids, and we both my wife and I were working full time, and I was going to school full time. It was sort of our house was a madhouse, and I was studying about this structure called a max heap. And one of my kids, my oldest son Oliver, came in, and he's a very, very gifted artist, and he does all kinds of media. But in this case, he was just drawing freehand with a mouse, and he drew this character, this guy with a backpack who kind of looked like a young kind of hippie or whatever. And I took one look at it, and I was studying these things, and I said, "Oh, let's call this guy." He brought it in to show me, "Hey, Dad, look at this." And I said, "Oh, let's call this guy Max Heap." And ever since then, I always tied the name Max Heap to this drawing that Oliver had done. So when Oliver was a teenager, we had some hard years together. Eventually, we sort of reconciled, but it was only to a point where we were civil and polite to each other, but there wasn't much more to it. And it was very heartbreaking for me because I have 5 kids, but he's my oldest. And I just always wanted a really good relationship with him. So anyway, I was now taking this year off from work, and as I told you, I was out in Washington State hiking in Rainier when I got the idea to hike the AT. But one of the reasons I was out there is Oliver was working part-time out there and living there, and I went to, in addition to hike, I went to visit him. And we had a great, just a real pleasant conversation where I told him, "Look, I know I made a lot of mistakes when you were a kid. You're our first son. I was inexperienced." And he did the same thing. He was like, "Oh, Dad, I was really arrogant when I was a kid," and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, we reconciled in a really meaningful way. And so now, within a couple weeks, I had realized I wanted to do this Appalachian Trail hike, and I had read about how people end up getting trail names. And being an IT guy, I thought, well, if I want to do a blog, the best thing would be if I had the domain name of my trail name. So I didn't want to wait till I got on trail and have somebody else give me a trail. Like I wanted to buy the domain name in advance and set up a blog so that my family could track me. And so I just chose my own trail name, but I chose the name Max Heap as a sort of tribute to this reconciled relationship I had with my oldest son.
Wow, that's really amazing. I love that backstory. You mentioned when you did your first through hike, Sobo in 2015 on the AT, the bonds that you had developed, you were a little surprised by, you developed early. Do any of those, it's been 10 years now, are you still in touch with any of those people?
Yeah, nearly all of them. Yeah, so uh, Mav, one of the hikers that I hiked with on the AT, we did about 1,000 miles of the CDT together, and we did about 500 miles of the PCT together. And he, this is really cool. So Mav is from a very small town in South Dakota, just outside of Rapid City. And another hiker on the AT that year, Birdie, is from the exact same little town. And so now here's a really interesting anecdote. So I was going through the 100-mile wilderness. It's my first through hike, and I had shoes that were too small. I got, when I say I got horrible blisters, I I got blisters on my heels that just developed into these like gaping kind of craters of these sores. And so when I got to Shaw's, I actually ended up having to stay there for 10 days. So I stayed at Shaw's 10 days waiting for my blisters to heal, never thinking I was going to quit because it was my first hike and I had the time and I knew I wanted to do it, but I couldn't walk. So as a result, I got to meet a bunch of people as they were passing through. I met Mav when he was passing through, and I met Birdie when she was passing through, and both of them told me they were from the same town in South Dakota and they hadn't heard of each other. So when we got to somewhere in Maine, I can't remember now, but I'll think of it later. Um, I introduced the two of them to each other, and fast forward, so ever since then they've been a couple. So they live together in a home in South Dakota. They've done a lot more hiking together after that. And so yeah, so Mav and Birdie I've stayed in touch with. Slim Jim is another hiker from that. Slim completed his Triple Crown last year, and we crossed paths. I was going Sobo on the PCT, and he was going Nobo, and we met in Crater Lake, and that was really cool. And he lives in the Netherlands, but he does most of his hiking over here. And another one of the hikers, Hero, I'd say about 10 of us who were all hikers together, we all converged about 2 years after that AT hike when he and his fiance got married, and we all went to that wedding. And other of the hike, yeah. So when I did the AT the second time in 2023, one of my trail family from the 2015 hike, I went and stayed with him in Atlanta, and then he drove me to Springer when I started because I went Nobo the second time. A Hero, the hiker whose wedding we went to, he now is a father, and he picked me up at is it called Mountain Crossing? What is it? Neil's
Yep,
Gap.
Neil's
Yeah,
Gap.
he
Yep.
he picked me up there. They live near there, and I stayed with them for a couple nights. Another hiker, String Bean, he picked me up. He lives in like around New York, PA area, and he picked me up, and I stayed with him for a couple days, and on and on. So yeah, we are all in touch with each other still. That's just from that first hike. I'm also in touch with hikers from the CDT. I'm in touch with hikers from the PCT, and I think we probably always will be. And it's, the cadence of it varies and so forth. But anytime any of us is doing anything exciting related to hiking, the first thing we do is get out there and ping all the others and say, "Hey, what are you guys up to? And this is what I'm doing." So yeah,
Yeah. That's
one of those
awesome. That
hikers.
that was
Oh, I
Go
was going to
ahead.
say one of the hikers from the CDT, Hammer. He met me when I did my cross country walk last year, which I think we'll talk about later. But he met me toward the end of that. He basically slack packed me for about a week. He and his dog in their van. It was just phenomenal. So we had a great time too. So yeah, those relationships. It's not just it's it's not an exaggeration at all when people say that they're forming lifelong friendships. It really is true. And I think maybe Vegas is onto something when he said the idea of what did he say, shared
Trauma.
trauma. Yeah, I think there's something to that. Uh, it's a grueling experience, and when someone else has gone through it, there's just it immediately tells you something about the person, and you can start having really detailed, interesting conversations with them.
That was one thing that surprised me by my hike. I didn't think so. I was 54 years old when I started the trail. I didn't think at 54 years old I would form new lifelong friendships, right? I mean, did you feel the same way?
Exactly.
I mean, I don't know if
Yeah.
you consciously even thought about that, but what'd you
No,
think?
for sure. Well, because in your adult life out in the working world, you don't, right? It's not like I go around meeting a bunch of, I mean, if you move to a new area, have new neighbors, whatever, sure. But it's not that normal of a thing for a 4-year-old or whatever to suddenly make a bunch of new friends. And it's just like a really fun surprise about hiking is that happens. And virtually happens to every hiker I know has ended up with a bunch of friends after a thru hike.
Yeah, and they're very, uh, there's they're different, I find, and I'm only speaking for me, and I'll ask you to maybe comment on it. I find they're a lot of them are even deeper friendships than I had back in what, what Vegas calls the Muggle world, and I also find that they are much more reciprocal, if you know what I mean by that.
Mhm, mhm.
Do you find that as well?
I do, and of course, there's a lot of commentary online. You can read about how surprised people are at how quickly friendships form and become really deep. And I think what people mean or what they're thinking of when they say that is the way that I know within a couple weeks of getting to know somebody on the trail, you almost know their entire life story. And I'm not saying that it's not that everybody that's on a trail is out there seeking for some big answer or has a problem they have to solve. That is certainly true of some people. But I would say even the people who are out there for reasons other than that, it somehow being out in the woods alone and being away from the sort of competitive rat race kind of world, it just it enables you to just stop and think about your life, and you end up wanting to talk about it. And in some ways it's really therapeutic to talk about it with relative strangers because they don't have this preconceived or preformed ideas about you based on how you've been for the last 20 years or whatever. And it's almost like, not that you're out there to reinvent yourself, but it gives you a chance to just strip back all of that. I haven't had hardly maybe one or two encounters on trails where people were trying to. There's that thing in the normal society where people are often trying to impress each other with their accomplishments, and they'll sort of drop little hints that tell you how much money they have and what kind of an outstanding, amazing career accomplishments and all that. And what I found on the trail is that the only credentials you have on the trail or whether you made the miles that day or not. And if you did, that's your credential. And nobody bothers with, how important you are outside of the trail. It's a very egalitarian thing without really even trying to be. It just sort of is. Um, and yeah, I think I just talked myself into forgetting what I was saying. Sorry.
No, it's perfect. No, it makes a lot of sense to me. So you, like a lot of other people, you finish your through hike, your AT through hike. You decide to come back. You tackle in 2019. You start the CDT as your
Hmm.
second long hike. You
Yep.
finish that. After you finish that second one, do you feel any uh, pressure or to become a triple crowner? Like, when did you start thinking about hiking the PCT?
Well, I probably thought about it before I did the CDT. So once I decided I would do another trail, I think I remember hearing somebody say, "Well, nobody ever just does two." And I think there's probably some truth to that. It's so I don't think I ever heard about the quote unquote triple crown while I was on the AT. I think I read about it or heard about it later. Um, it didn't exactly appeal to me in the sense of that's a certificate I always wanted to have or whatever. But what did appeal to me is that, oh, there are two other trails that people are promoting as wonderful experiences as the AT. And I thought, okay, well, if that's the case, I want to try those. And so when I read about the PCT and the CDT, it was my assumption that the CDT was going to be more challenging for me, just given that it was much more remote. You were less likely to encounter other hikers. Uh, and anyway, but there was also a lot of talk how both of them had similar characteristics. They both have desert sections. They both have the very high mountain ranges that you go through and picturesque, big open scenes. And so it's kind of another, this is not something I mentioned earlier, but one of the other motivations I had in doing the Sobo doing the AT Sobo was that I had read that that Maine and New Hampshire are probably the two physically most demanding states on the trail. And I thought, okay, well, if I start at Katahdin and I manage to get through both Maine and New Hampshire, then the kind of person I am, that will give me this additional confidence to say to myself, look, the trail's not going to be easy from here, but at least what people say is the hardest stuff I've managed to complete. And so I sort of applied that same logic with the CDT and thought, okay, let me try the CDT second. And if I succeed, then yeah, I'll probably want to do the PCT, but it'll be knowing that in my mind, at least, the CDT is behind me, and I can kind of, try to just embrace and enjoy the PCT for what it is. And yeah, anyway, so that was maybe the calculus behind that.
After you finished the CDT, I read a quote where you said, "I'm simply not the same person that started the hike, and I doubt I'll ever morph back into what I was." Can you tell me where your head was when you said that?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. It really makes me well up just to even think about it. I just, like a lot of people, I was extremely devoted to my career and to advancing in that way. I wanted, I wanted achievements in education and achievements in my career, and I'm not negative about those things. I think those kinds of motivations get you so far in life, and I'm glad that I felt motivated by that. But you sort of reach a point with that stuff where it gets you so far and not any further. And what I mean is that ultimately career and education alone weren't I didn't find them fulfilling. Or at least, there's that part of me that still really needed something. And I should say uh, I imagine if I'm somebody listening to this that I'm wondering, does this guy have faith? Yeah, I do. I don't talk about it. But I have that. So I don't want people to think that the trail became my religion because it's not my religion, but the trail has made somehow day to day life on the trail feels way more meaningful to me than, um, than just simply there are people who work for reasons beyond money and esteem or whatever. For me, mostly my work was tied to just it was a means to bringing in income for our family and a means to an end. And I enjoyed it. I really like writing code. That's the one thing I really do enjoy doing. But I'm a different person because I uncovered parts of me that I didn't know were there. I didn't know that later in my life that I would want to embrace physical challenges as much. I sort of thought that was what I did when I was younger, played sports and whatnot, but I just didn't picture that for myself. And also, I don't think I realized how much my mental health would improve. Um, the experience on the trails and sort of getting up each day and working through all the challenges of it and stuff, I just feel like it's given me a new set of tools in dealing with day to day life. And yeah, I think it's ruined. I think the trails have ruined me for going back and just slogging away at a job for money. I would do that if I had to. I'm glad I don't have to. Yeah, I don't know. Does that get to what you were asking?
Yeah, 100%. And I think you just answered probably what the next question was I had in my head. So you complete the CDT, 2022, you complete the PCT, again southbound, to finish your triple hike. I'm just going to guess that the pride that you felt in becoming a triple crowner overshadowed anything you'd done in your corporate world.
Yeah. I think that's accurate. It really it's an accomplishment that I feel very people who are not through hikers don't even know what it is, so I don't even bother telling them. But yes, I feel yeah, just me. And the thing is, I don't have any interest in stopping. I just want to keep doing it. It's just, it's not, it's not an end. It's just, I don't know if I can say it's a means to, maybe it is a means to an end. I like the way I feel when I'm hiking. I love the challenge around it. That doesn't mean that every day is pleasant on trail. Some are definitely not. Um, but yeah, I like the way I feel when I'm engaged in a through hike.
Found it very interesting in reading, and your blogs are great. I read all of them,
Wow,
and
you're
yeah,
the one.
yeah, yeah. All of them are marked red now. I found it very, I found it very interesting. So you complete the Triple Crown, you come back, and you're like, okay, I'm going to do. So you do the Appalachian Trail Nobo in 2023. You complete it, you get to the sign, and you said before you could get your picture taken at the sign, you were so emotional that you actually had to regain your composure before you could get a picture there. And this is your fourth through hike, and it still
Mm.
meant that much to you. Can you take me to when you hit that, you go across the tablelands, you hit that sign? What were you feeling on your fourth finish?
Well, I think the one thing in my mind was that that's where it had all started for me because I started Sobo, my first hike. So returning to Katahdin was a really big deal. Yeah. Well, also a couple weeks prior to summiting in 2023, was in Maine. You'll know the Carabasset, and we were crossing the Carabasset, and I won't go into all the detail, but the long story short is that I got swept away. So I stepped into the water and immediately I stepped on a slimy, like a moss covered stone and immediately went under and lost my glasses and a trek pole and water bottle and other stuff. And I was flailing. I was underwater. I had unhooked my pack, which, you're told to do in case you have to escape from it, but I didn't want to just let it jettison down. So it was still on me and I was underwater, flailing, trying to grab a hold of something as I was pulled. And I grabbed a hold of a rock and managed to pull myself to the other side. But uh, I nearly quit the trail when that happened because it scared me. It was probably the most dangerous thing that's ever happened to me on trail. And so I think part of when I like, it's funny when you said that going across the tablelands, I could just, anybody who's been there can picture that. And I think maybe not in the forefront of my thinking, but in the background, I was like, oh, I didn't quit even after that happened. I made it back here. And so I think that was probably on my mind as well.
Yeah, I think that's what you called your toughest 10 seconds on any trail or something like that. I remember you
Yeah.
saying that. That's
Yeah.
scary. It's, Mother Nature can be very scary. So
Yeah.
you finish the AT in 2023. This is a kind of a cliche question, I think. I
Yeah.
hate to even ask it, but how much
Mm.
different was it? Did you find going northbound than southbound? What were just a couple of the differences maybe that hit you right away? Other
Well,
than like the hordes of people at the beginning.
what's really strange, not strange, but was unexpected. So everyone had told me, Max, you've done all Sobo hikes. You're probably not going to like Nobo, or it's going to be too many people for it. I loved the Nobo hike. I absolutely had a gas and I didn't mind all the crowds, the trail magic. I had never really, when you're Sobo, there's not a whole lot of trail magic that's sort of designed for Sobo. So I hadn't experienced that much of it. And on the contrary, it was practically every gap I turned around in the south, there was somebody there and that was really fun. And it wasn't just the food and drink, but it was the people sitting around talking at the time. And so I loved every moment of that. And yeah, it really made me feel like I definitely want to do the Novo CDT and PCT experiences because um, so yeah, as far as I think the other thing was just it was really fun to go to land back at some of the same spots, but from the other direction, like doing the priest. So going Nobo is a breeze by Sobo with the priest is really tough because you go up, 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 right? But so it was stuff like that, little, anyway.
That's funny. So I mentioned at the open, you had I thought, a really cool and unique journey last year in 2024. You called it your coast to coast hike. Tell us a little bit about that, and I'd like to really know what inspired you to do that because it's not a regular far out trail.
Yeah, no, it's not. It wasn't a trail at all. I devised the route myself. Well, so here's what happened. I had actually been thinking about it in 23, and I just couldn't work out where I was gonna, like, I just was too nervous about where I was gonna sleep at night. Because when you're walking through towns and farms, and, when you're just gonna walk across the country rather than through a mountain trail, I mean, on the long trails, you get tired and you pull off trail and find a place to lay your tent and you're done. But I couldn't work out how to do that, so I sort of, I guess, chickened out of it in 23, and I said, well, I'm going to just go. I want to hike. I'll go do another trail, and so I did my first Noble hike. I just loved it. So now in 24, I actually started Noble on the CDT again, thinking that, yeah, I'm just, I want to do that cross country thing, but I can't work out. I'm a little too nervous about sleeping, and I know I want to do all these other trails Noble, so I'm just going to start. So I went Noble on the CDT from the border up until the cliff dwellings. It's maybe 200 from the
Okay.
border to, or maybe 300. I don't know. It's not that far. And so while I was the last couple of days while I was on the CDT going north, I had just been chewing over this idea in my head. I just really wanted, I don't know what it is. I think it's just like on a map. I just loved the idea of looking at a map of the United States and being able to say that I just walked across from one coast to the other. And so I had looked in the past at the what is the trail called in the middle of the country?
Trans America or something like that,
No,
or
there's oh, hang on. I, I'll look it up here. It's called the American Discovery Trail. And it's a bona fide long distance trail. There's actually from the coasts in about a third of the way on each side into the country. There's one route, and then from those 2 points, there are a northern route and a southern route that you can take. So I had looked at considering doing that, and what they've done is they essentially have stitched together a cross country trail based on a lot of like local trails that they've just managed to cobble together and sort of come up with this. The problem I had was that there's a long stretch when you go through Nevada where there's no water, and you have to essentially, what other people have done is go out and cache water in advance, and the logistics of doing that were just prohibitive for me, and I just didn't want to get into it. So anyway, I had decided not to try to pursue the ADT, the American Discovery Trail. And so I had been, I had actually planned out using Google Maps and a bunch of other things, an entire route that started from Seattle and went east to approximately, well, to Delaware. And I'm from Minnesota originally, so it appealed to me to go through Minnesota on the hike and visit family. And my wife and I live in Washington State now, so it also appealed to me to go through. And in fact, I walked right through our backyard on this trail. So anyway, I had come up with this route, but so here I'm on the CDT, and I'm like, you spent weeks building that route. The only thing you can't figure out is where you're going to sleep at night, but why don't you just do it? It's on your brain. You're going to think about it the whole way while you're hiking the CDT. And so I said, yeah, I agreed, and finally gave in to this argument voice in my head. And I left the CDT at the Gila Cliff Dwellings. I hitched back down to Lordsburg, got on a train, went back to California, and then back up to Seattle. Got off the train, stayed one night at a hostel in Seattle, and started the next morning from this route that I had created like 2 years earlier. And yeah, the motivation, let's see. I think it was just, well, part of it is really dumb, but every time I've hiked one of the Triple Crown trails, I've always loved passing through towns, whether it be you hitch in and resupply or you pass through on foot. I love interacting with people from towns that I've never been to, especially smaller towns. So there was this sort of naive, oh, this is going to be like American culture 101 kind of an exposure. It's not going to be a wilderness hike. It's going to be more like a small town hike. And you're going to, the walking will be a lot easier because you're just, I mean, road walking is hard on your legs, but it's easy in terms of, it's graded much better for travel and all that stuff, right? And there's not a bunch of boulders in your way. And so I was walking, dirt roads, farm treks, and some trails. Sometimes I'd be off into a trail, um, and then unfortunately a lot of highway walking through. Like there's parts of Montana where you, your own. My only choice was to really walk long, like hundreds of miles of stretches on highways, not freeways, but well traveled paved highways where there's virtually no border, no uh, um, what am I trying to say? The edge of the road,
Like a breakdown lane or soft shoulder.
no shoulder. Yeah, a lot
Yeah.
of the road walking, and so anyway, but yeah, I think the motivation was just this idea that I want to look at a map and not only say that I've traversed the country north to south, but that I've done it east to west. So
That's really cool. In my mind, I'm curious as to what kind of reactions you got along the way, because when I close my eyes and I think of you going from Washington to Delaware, I just picture John Rambo walking across the bridge with his backpack and the sheriff putting him in his car and driving him back across the bridge. What? Because people on that hike there, and you can confirm this for me, on the AT or the Yellow trails, they're used to seeing people hitchhiking out of town, and they may not look, may not smell the best and be a little, ragged and stuff like that. But I got to believe you met a lot of people along the way that really didn't know what you were doing.
your intuition's 100% accurate. In fact, I don't think anybody who encountered me initially thought that I was doing what I was doing when I told them. Most of them were pretty surprised. Most people did think I was either homeless or transient, and not by choice, but that I was down and out. I mean, I had people stop repeatedly. Like this woman, where this would have been in Montana, I think, and she pulls over. I was walking through a town because I remember when she pulled over, there was a parking area, and she waved me over to her vehicle, and she rolled down her window and she said, "Are you hungry? I've got a salad here." She had this like salad in a plastic container. I said, "Oh, no, I'm okay." And she looked me deeply in the eyes and she said, "Now come on, when's the last time you ate?" And I could, she said it in that way of, she for certainly thought I was homeless and destitute. And I had another guy, only a couple days removed from that. I was walking a highway and he waved me across the highway. So he pulled over, he stopped about 100 yards up for where I was. And as I walked, he waved me over. And when the traffic cleared, I ran over to the other side. And he had just been at a Jersey Mike's Subs and he had a bag uh, in the cab of his truck. And there were the sandwich had been wrapped and cut in two halves, and he had a half in his hand. And as he was holding it out to me as I ran across the road, and he goes, "You look like you're on some hard times. And how would you like a sandwich?" And I said to him, "Oh, no, I'm not on hard times. I'm just on a very long hike." And he started to kind of pull the sandwich back, but I grabbed it and I said, "But I am very hungry." And I took that sandwich before he could pull it back. And we smiled. He left, and I devoured that. I was super hungry. I devoured that thing standing right there on the side of the road. But yeah, I had a lot of encounters like that. And, it's for obvious reasons, right? You don't normally see a person walking through your town, long hair and a beard and a backpack and dirty and smelly, and assume that this is some legitimate long hike they're doing. It's more likely that they're probably going to be a homeless person that's drifted into town. So the fact that that's what people thought didn't surprise me. But yeah, I don't think anybody pulled over and said, "Hey, are you doing a cross country walk?" It was that was not what they thought when they saw me.
It's trail magic, close to akin to what you'd get on a long trail. But I almost think it's, deeper. It's a more empathetic type of I don't even wanna call it trail magic. It's just, the best parts of humanity showing up on your encounter. No?
No, you know what? I was just sort of listening. You just said something that I had never really thought of because I had sort of categorized it all, and it happened a lot, and I thought of it as trail magic. But you're right. Those were people that were motivated by I want to help out a fellow human being, and they had no thought that they were helping a long distance hiker. And so I was given places to stay. Like one time, this was many of my stories are in Montana because it's such a long state, right? But this might have been Montana or it might have been North Dakota. So I walked up to this store. It was about 7:30 or 8 in the evening, and I had been a long stretch without anything, and so now here's the first chance to get a bit of a resupply. And it was also nearly dark, and there was nowhere around. And so I asked at the store, I said, "Hey," because there was a billboard out that in front of it that was advertising this campground. And I said, "Is that campground anywhere near here?" Because I had stayed at a lot of campgrounds on the walk. And the gal said, "Oh, it's about 8 or 10 miles down the road." She said, "Why?" And I explained what I was doing, and she said, "Well, you can stay in our yard." And so she gave me her address, and I went. She lived about 2 blocks from there, and I camped in their yard that night. I had that sort of experience happen a lot. People offered me places to stay in their yards, in their town. Um, I had a lot of people stop and offer me. Oh, here's a really sweet one. So this probably about a 30-year-old man and I'd say like a 5 or 6-year-old boy who was his son. I was on a highway walk and I was out of water and it was a Sunday morning and there was nothing around. So I left the highway and walked this other road to get into this town seeking water. And I got to this intersection. This truck was there getting ready to make a turn and I walked up and rolled down their window. It was this guy and his kid. And I asked him if there was a place I could get some water in town. And he said, "It's a Sunday, not much is open, but if you go down here, there's blah, blah, blah." And so, anyway, thank you very much. And so they left. I went, walked down, got some water, and was now walking back to the highway. And about 5 or 10 minutes later, that same truck pulled up and waved me, pulled up on the side of the road I was and waited until I got up there. And when I got up, they had rolled down the window, and the guy said, "My son couldn't stop talking about you, and he wanted to make you a lunch." And so this little boy hands me, just, sorry, choked up again, but he hands me this little brown paper bag like a school lunch. And they had made me a sandwich, and there was a granola bar and like an orange or an apple or something. And it was just so sweet. And so, yeah, I had that kind of stuff happen all the time, and none of those people were, uh, you know, uh, living in places where it was frequent for them to have through hikers pass through, and they knew what it was. They were all just being nice citizens, kind people. And
Oh, that's really awesome.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I had not thought of it that way up until now. It's gonna that'll be something I'll chew on more today. Yeah.
Just 2 things, we'll wrap up with this.
Okay.
First, you like myself, I have a family, been married 35, I guess almost 36 years now. I know that, uh, for me, it was tough to be away for 5 months for my family. Because I didn't see my wife for 4 months in person. She came and met me and my small family at Pinkham Notch, which is closer to Maine, because I was heading north on my hike. So that was really hard, and I do have the pull of another long hike because what it did for me selfishly, right? I feel like it's selfish has a bad connotation sometimes, I think, but selfishly for me, I got so much more out of it, and I felt like I was a better person in many aspects of my life when I got back. How do you navigate being gone for that amount of time from your wife, your partner? I know you have 5 children, 4 grandchildren. There's Yeah, how do you navigate that, mentally and communication wise with them?
Yeah. Um, the first hike was the worst or the hardest. And that's I'm sure everyone can imagine. So even though I had sort of talked to my wife in advance about, hey, could I take a year off work and so forth, once she realized, well, I had not presented the idea of doing a through hike because I didn't know what that was. I was just going to go do national park hikes and spend a year wandering around doing that kind of thing. And so when I changed the plan and called her and said, hey, look, I just decided I want to use the bulk of my time to hike the Appalachian Trail. And I think my wife's initial concern was, is he doing this because he's trying to, is this an escape from, like, is he losing interest in the rest of his life, whether it be work or family or home or whatever? And it was absolutely not that. Well, maybe it was losing interest for work, but not for family and home and all that. But it's a very difficult, like, that's really hard to prove unless it's over time. So after the first, well, during and after the first hike, it was really challenging. And both of us had, it took us a while to adjust to being away from each other because we had never been away from each other for a long period of time. And I think with each successive hike, we've talked to Wendy and I, my wife's name is Wendy. We're very open with each other and we talk through stuff a lot. So we tend to, if there's something that we're thinking might be an issue, we'll talk about it to try to make sure it won't become one. And so we've talked about this, and I think with each hike, the talks have gotten easier. And we, both of us, are mutually. Um, I developed some fears while I was gone hiking that, oh, Wendy's probably created this whole life without me when I'm not there. And I think she had similar feelings, like he's meeting all these young people who are so interesting and active and energetic, and maybe he's developing a life outside of home. And but the truth is, neither of us wanted that, and that's not what it was about at all. It was about pursuing something that's both mentally and physically really healthy for me. And I think over time it actually has really been healthy for our relationship because now we know, but both of us have, I guess you'd say, a nice mix of, there's things that we love to do together and depend on each other for, but we also both have things that we do that the other isn't so much into, and that's okay. And it's just a nice balance. And yeah, I would say I think it makes me a better, like, a partner in a relationship, a marriage, a husband, whatever. I think it makes me better at that because I don't feel burdened by the things that I felt burdened by before. The trail has kind of resolved things in my mind. It helped me be more at peace with who I became as a human, as an adult, as a human being, or whatever. So, yeah. But yeah, it was, there's some tough stages to go through. And I think in our case, we've just both always been very, very committed to making the marriage work. And I think that commitment is what helped us get through it. Mhm.
Yeah, those are a lot of awesome points. Let's finish with this, and I'm curious about this. So we're rapidly approaching. What do we got? About a little over a month before we turn the clock into 2026. What are Maxheap's plans for 2026?
So I was actually on track to, I think I had been on trail. I was on trail in 21, 22, 23, 24. Last year, or that is to say, this year in 25 is the first year I haven't been on trail in quite a while. And also, I will not be on trail next year, on a long through hike next year. And that's because what happened is, I was actually planning on doing another through hike this year, but my wife and I talked and decided that I have been working about half of a year and hiking about half of a year for the past 5. But now we've decided officially we want to retire in 27 in spring. So if any of my colleagues at work are watching this, that's not something they knew until this moment. But anyway, and so
Spoiler alert.
yeah. So with that in mind, I said, well, then I don't want to do the 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I'll come back and I'll work fully, pad the nest a little more, and we'll both, sort of retire together in spring of 27. I should also add, my wife is British, and when we retire, we're going to move. Her mom lives in a place called the Isle of Man, which is a little island off the coast of Liverpool, between England and Ireland, if you can sort of picture it in there. Famous for a motorcycle race called the TT. But anyway, that's where we will be moving there in 27 for to retire. However, my wife and I have already worked out that starting again in 27, I will resume my one long through hike a year cadence. And so 27, my plan is to do the CDT. I wanted to do it Nobo, um, but I think so. I live in Eastern Washington. It's only several hours drive to Glacier from here. And so the plan that we're cooking up right now is that my wife and I, when we retire in the spring of 27, the two of us are going to take an extended vacation together in Glacier. The the train goes, we live in Spokane, and you can literally take the train to East Glacier from here. And so we're going to close up, get all ready to move to England, and then we're going to go to Glacier together. So we'll close up where we live now, and everything will get shipped and sold and so forth. And then we're going to go enjoy each other's company for a week or two in Glacier, and then I'm going to start a Sobo through hike from that trip. And then Wendy is going to leave and head over to England ahead of me by 5 months or so. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that sounds like an awesome plan to me
Yeah,
right there. And Isle of Man is beautiful. And actually, I can't remember right off the top of my head how many miles it is, but a section of the IAT, the International Appalachian Trail, goes through
it
Isle
does.
of Man. So you'll have
So
to check that out.
I've done it. So
Oh, wow.
there's a trail around the perimeter of the island. It's got a traditional Manx name, and I can't remember it, but it traces the perimeter of the island. And so I haven't done that entire trail, but me and my oldest son Oliver, the one that the Maxheap name came from, he and I did it together 3 or 4 years ago. And you're absolutely right. It's part of that's that whole thing of the Appalachian Mountains at one point where was it Pangea? Was that the
Yes.
continent? And then it sort of split out. And if you ever go to the IAT site and look at it, you'll see the Isle of Man's perimeter trail is one section of that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really cool. I did the main section, 138 miles
Oh,
this past
cool.
summer from the summit of Baxter to
You
the
did.
Canadian border. Yeah, it was really cool. Yeah, didn't see another single person the whole time, but it was quite cool. And I'm actually looking at maybe doing a little New Brunswick next year and then go back. I mean, it goes all the way to Morocco. So
Did you do that as one food carry, or did you resupply along?
no, I mean, you passed literally diners. The
Oh,
longest
oh,
food
okay.
carry I had was there were two 30-mile sections. So really all you needed for food was 2 days. I
Nice.
brought food that I started with home with me in my in my food bag. So, but it
Yeah.
was really fun. Look, I first of all want to just express my great gratitude for you coming on and sharing your journey. I love talking to people, and I love hearing about the transformation, big or small. You know, some people I've talked to, they're like, "Oh yeah, I did that, check the box," and that's fine. That was their journey. But I love hearing about the way it affects people because it affected me, and that's why I do these sit downs with people to stay connected to that feeling that you can only get by to go back again to with people who have gone through that same shared trauma with you. So I want to thank you very much for coming on.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure. I really enjoyed. I think your interview style is a really good one because you just ask very succinct but poignant questions, and yeah, I enjoyed it thoroughly. So thanks a lot, and I'm sure hopefully we'll bump into each other on trail somewhere.
Again, thank you for coming on, and I can't wait to get this out because I think people will really enjoy it.
Good. Oh, I'm glad to hear it. And yeah, thanks a lot. I really enjoyed chatting.
We'll talk again soon.
All right, cool.
Bye bye.